Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to you all for today's executive briefing, looking at the increased risks associated to women and LGBTQ plus travellers and what you as companies can do to support them and fulfil your duty of care obligations. My name is Erica and I am the Operations Manager here at Maiden Voyage, and I am here to simply run through the housekeeping, and our founder and CEO, Carolyn Pearson, will be delivering the key information to you today. This webinar will last somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour, and it is being recorded. Slides are copyright of Maiden Voyage. There will be a few polls released throughout this session, so please do be responsive to these. And there will be time for questions towards the end. And to do this, simply write in the question box, which will be in the panel bar to your right, I believe, of your screen, and submit them. If you would like to remain anonymous, please state this in the text box. But for now, let's move on and get on with today's questions in hand. So, having won numerous awards, Maiden Voyage has been widely featured in the international press, including the BBC, The Economist and The Guardian. Carolyn is a regular speaker on the international speaker circuit on the subject of female and LGBTQ plus business traveller safety, and indeed represents women travellers on the GBTA, which is the Global Business Travel Association Risk Committee. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Carolyn. Carolyn, are you there?
I am, Erica. Thank you very much for that warm introduction. I'm just going to run through the agenda for today's session. We won't keep you more than an hour. I'm going to briefly talk about who Maiden Voyage are. We're going to explore the question, is agenda appropriate? We're going to look at whether or not a diverse TRM organisation actually sits within your organisation already, and if so, where it sits. And we're also going to share with you some case studies of other organisations who have implemented a diverse traveller programme. We're then going to share with you some top tips to safeguard your female business travellers and your LGBT travellers, and of course there will be a few minutes at the end to ask any questions. Now Erica is just going to release a poll for you.
Fantastic. Okay, so this is our first poll of the day, and I just want to get an idea, not really just to make sure that our all of our systems are working. So I'm just going to launch that for you. So you should see that on your screen. So if you could just take a minute to say which title best represents your position. So there's travel risk management professional, travel manager or booker, diversity inclusion, an HR, TMC or other travel provider, or maybe you fall under the other bracket. Okay, so 44% of you have voted. You need to wake up, 50%, 63%, awesome. Right, we're all working. I know it's towards the end of the day here in sunny UK. Right, I'm going to close that now, 2 more seconds, and closed. So you should be able to see on your screen there. Carolyn, can you see those results there? So we know that we've got quite a good amount of travel risk management, diversity inclusion, HR, TMCs, and we've got loads of other.
Okay, well, be interesting to find out who you other people are as we go through maybe at the questions at the end. So let's get started then. I'm just going to take literally 2 minutes to tell those of you who don't know us who Maiden Voyage are. So I actually launched the company 10 years ago. We're 10 this year. We are specialists in female and LGBTQ duty of care. And we've also set a recognised standard for female-friendly hotels around the world. Now, in terms of our positioning within the market, you can see that we actually partner with International SOS, and we also partner with a number of travel management companies. And quite often organisations get us confused because they think that we are in competition with these types of organisations. But in effect, what we do is we work alongside such organisations and just provide that extra level of expertise or specialism for your diverse traveller groups. And in fact, in some instances, some of our TMC partners can actually take a data feed of our female-friendly hotels. So Maiden Voyage makes business travel safe and social for your diverse traveller groups, and we provide global solutions to help you to safeguard your LGBT and your female business travellers. Many of you will be familiar with the legislation around health and safety at work and the Duty of Care Act, and what we do is help you to fulfil your obligations. And we do that through three different solutions. So first one I'm going to talk you through is our corporate solution. So organisations will have access to our corporate platform. First thing that we do when we come into the organisation is review the travel policy and the travel process to look for any specific areas whereby an extra level or element of support could be given to diverse travellers. We then work with you to provide a webinar which incorporates how people can comply to your booking processes and procedures and adhere to using your TMC and working with your TRM provider. We also provide, therefore, another group of webinars, which is our Traveller Wellbeing webinar series, which is open to all travellers, irrespective of gender or sexual orientation. As I mentioned, we can feed through to yourselves our list of female-friendly hotels, and your travellers can use our platform to identify colleagues from other regions who may be travelling to the same destination. And that also includes access to our team of global ambassadors, which is over 80 women around the world who can provide gender-specific information about the city that your travellers may be travelling to. We also have a suite of e-learning modules, so 5 20-minute modules which can be consumed on any internet-enabled device, and I'll be talking through some case studies later of organisations who are using an e-learning solution. And then finally, our third product or solution is classroom training, where we come on site and we deliver intensive female traveller safety training courses, again, always tailored to the risk profile and the destinations that your travellers may be travelling to. And these courses may well be just for female travellers, if that's how you prefer it, or we prefer to do it in a mixed environment so that your male travellers and your male managers can see some of the specific issues which do face the female travellers. And of course, this makes it really accessible to the LGBTQ community because they can attend the course without outing themselves. So Maiden Voyage is also a research organisation. In 2016, we ran the Women in Business Travel Report, and that talks about the issues facing women travellers across a cross-section of different suppliers, so hotels, trains, planes, ground transportation providers. And I'm going to be sharing some of the statistics from that report with you shortly, and Erica will also send information on that report in the follow-up email. So let's start by asking the question, is a gender agenda appropriate? It's 2018 and many organisations are striving to have equality in the workplace. But of course, we've all travelled possibly extensively and we know that the world at large isn't actually an equal place. So let's look at some of the issues and risks shortly in terms of what will be impacting your travellers. But before we get started, Erica's going to release another poll just to find out where you are in terms of whether or not you believe that organisations should be mindful of gender and sexual orientation when they're developing their travel risk policies.
Okay, that should be up on. So the question there is, do you believe organisations should be mindful of gender and sexual orientation when developing travel risk policies? Yes, no, or unsure. Okay, I'm going to close that vote for you now. So a huge 92% say they believe that organisations should be mindful, and 8% say that they're unsure.
Wow, that's interesting because on yesterday's webinar, we had 70% who felt that they should and 4% felt that they shouldn't. So a lot more of you today are already engaged with this concept. We'd also like to ask which of you already factor in gender and sexual orientation into your travel policies. We can't see who has voted what, so we're not judging, but we do expect to see a gap between those of you who believe that you should, but you've not yet actually done it.
Okay, so that's now released. So it's a simple yes or no response. So do you currently factor in gender and or sexual orientation when looking at travel and travel risk policies? Okay, I'm going to close that vote now. A couple more seconds, still votes coming in. Okay. And that's shared for you on the screen.
Okay, so yeah, much smaller percentage of you who believe that you should and you've not yet got around to it. So hopefully today's webinar will help you to get started. So let's pop the proverbial elephant in the room. It's 2018, as I mentioned. So is this even relevant? Well, obviously, quite a lot of you already agree with this. Some of the objections that we've heard previously is that it could be perceived as patronising or discriminating. People ask why women need special treatment, if it's damaging the equality agenda. Organisations say that they don't differentiate between different types of travellers. How do they know if somebody does belong to the LGBTQ community? How would they know if somebody is trying to get pregnant or is already pregnant? Once or twice we come across security managers who've had their heads bitten off when they've tried to give advice to powerful, well-travelled women. And many organisations feel that because they've got a TMC or a travel risk management provider, they're adequately covered. What I would say is, out of the report that we ran in 2016, the conclusion was that women told us that they didn't want to be treated differently, they wanted to be treated appropriately. So let's look at some of the areas which may impact your diverse traveller groups. Firstly, of course, we've got legal restrictions. So if you imagine that you're sending a lady to the Middle East, for example, there are some things that she may need to do or may not need to do to make sure that she's legal and travelling appropriately in that region. But of course, we've also got the cultural restrictions. So these are often more nuanced. It could be the way that you dress. It could be around public displays of affection or even just business etiquette. So whilst here in the West, we are quite forthright, possibly in the business arena, you know, initiating handshakes, eye contact, pushing an agenda. In some more conservative societies, that may have the wrong effect. And then, of course, what we found from the Women in Business Travel report is that there has been a high proportion of sexual harassment and sexual assault, and I'll be talking a little bit about that later. Besides legal responses to homosexuality, of course, there is also the risk of homophobia. And then what might seem like a small issue by comparison is that of handbag theft. But we know that handbag theft is a really common crime in transport hubs and in upscale hotels. And if one can imagine that a handbag is stolen and it contains somebody's travel plans, the money, credit cards, passport, etc., we can just see how that risk may escalate really, really quickly, particularly if that happens in a country where the person doesn't speak the language. And of course, we'll be touching on this in more detail, but health and pregnancy implications for women specifically. So imagine that you're sending a woman or a member of the LGBTQ community to a different region, and something which was to happen which was related to gender or sexual orientation. And of course, in the wider scale, any travel risk management. So if there did happen to be a major incident, and there would potentially be an investigation. And what the investigators are going to be looking at is whether or not you provided adequate pre-trip briefings, any travel policies that you had in place, did you perform a risk assessment, and what kind of pre-trip training did you offer to your travellers at large, but also to you specifically to your diverse traveller groups. So I'm just going to share with you some stats from the Women in Business Travel report. 1 in 4 women had suffered a negative incident when travelling on business, and half of these incidents were pertinent to sexual harassment or sexual assault. And in fact, 79% of business travellers said that they felt underprepared to deal with any incident which they may encounter. And in fact, when we're delivering our classroom training, quite often we're hearing that women have been in unsafe situations and didn't actually realise that they were in unsafe situations. And whether they did realise or didn't realise, it's very rare that they report this back to the travel manager or back to your travel management company. And so we know that the feedback loop is really, really poor, and so therefore corrective actions not being taken. 70% therefore believe that travel suppliers should try harder to meet their specific needs, and we're going to be looking specifically at ground transportation, airlines and hotel safety. And 31% of female business travellers felt that they weren't adequately supported by their employers. I'm going to give you two shocking examples of just some of the things that members of the female traveller community have had to contend with. This was a lady who checked into a hotel here in the north of England, and rather than the obligatory welcome to the hotel message on her TV screen, she was welcomed with a message which said, "I am going to rape you." You can imagine if that was to happen to yourself or to one of your travellers, that would be very, very distressing. But another example here of a passenger who was accused of sexually assaulting a woman whilst she was asleep on a flight. Sadly, this is becoming more and more a common offence. And our latest piece of research is actually the Women in Business Travel Aviation Report. And we're surveying both female business travellers and cabin and cockpit crew to see how widespread this issue really is. We've already had a sneak peek at some of the results of those surveys, and they're actually quite alarming. So watch this space. We will be releasing that research at the end of this year. So thinking about travel risk management, we're going to be looking widely at where it sits in your organisation, but we're also going to be looking at where it sits from a diversity perspective. And before we get on to the next poll, if we could just pop back, Erica, to the last slide. What I would just like to share with you is that I spoke at the Beyond Duty of Care or Beyond Travel Risk event a few months ago. And much like yourselves, I asked the question, do you think that there should be a diversity angle towards travel risk? And around about 90%, so really similar to this group, said that they felt that there should be. And so it got us thinking, got us scratching our heads within Maiden Voyage, because whilst 90% of organisations believe that they should do something, much like yesterday's attendees, very few organisations are. And the reason that we feel that that's an issue is because organisations really struggle to understand where travel risk management should sit. So we're going to have a chat with you now. We're going to get some more feedback and find out where travel risk management or where you think travel risk management should sit within an organisation.
Okay, release that poll. So where does the ownership of travel risk management sit within your organisation? So travel procurement, security, health and safety, D&I or HR, or a combination of the above. The votes are coming in. A few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close that vote now. And I'm sharing that on the screen with you, Carolyn.
Great. So interesting. Most of you have said 64% a combination of the above, and I absolutely agree. Sometimes that's also a problem as well as a good thing, because if everybody thinks that everybody else should be doing this, sometimes organisations don't do anything because they're all waiting for somebody else, and it's like the proverbial hot potato getting passed from person to person. So it's sometimes unclear who owns it, who's a sponsor, who's a stakeholder, and who's the ultimate decision maker. And of course, I'm preaching to the converted, I'm sure. The last thing we want is for an incident to occur whilst that hot potato is being passed around, and we have occasionally seen that. Thank you, Erica. So I'm going to share with you now some case studies of organisations who have implemented diverse traveller solutions. So the first one I'm going to talk about is just to give you a cross section of some of our clients. So we actually operate across a large number of sectors. This is just a small number of our clients. But what you can see, interestingly, is there's some rather male-dominated industries here, such as football, oil and gas, we've got banking, and we've got mining as well. So a lot of people think that we're just providing our solutions to organisations who are typically sending buyers off in the fashion industry, but actually what we're doing is pertinent to all different industries. So let's share some specific examples with you. I'm going to start with a financial services client. And in fact, I mentioned earlier a person who said to me that they'd had their head bitten off when they tried to give advice to a female traveller. And this gentleman was from the professional services industry. So he didn't want it to be patronising or discriminatory. He was very nervous about that upsetting the diversity and inclusion agenda. But also the organisation as a whole wanted to attract more women into senior positions, and they felt that many women weren't applying for those senior positions because of the travel element. And in fact, some of our clients have said that during the interview process now for new members of staff, potential candidates are asking employers what they do from a travel perspective in terms of what class they'll be flying, what types of hotels they'll be staying in. Are they expected to travel in their own time? So people are a lot more mindful of both duty of care and well-being when they're traveling on business. Now, this particular financial services organisation also wanted to improve their travel safety awareness over multiple sites. So in this instance, a classroom training solution wasn't the right thing for them, and they opted to take our e-learning modules. As a result, they saw a slight increase in more women being attracted to senior roles within the organisation. But interestingly, women were also saying that they had identified unsafe situations that they had previously unknowingly been in. And because their male colleagues were also doing the e-learning modules, they proactively took some of the hotels off the hotel program when they thought about, thought about sending women and sort of younger, less experienced travellers to some darker, dingy areas of London, down back streets and so on. So it made the male colleagues also think about what they were doing with their travellers and started to value them a little bit more. Now, our next example is a Silicon Valley tech giant. The challenge for this organisation is that they had provided some heat training for all of their travellers, so hostile environment awareness training if you've not come across heat before. And during that training, some of their female travellers requested something which was gender specific. We initially provided a one-day classroom-style training course for this organisation out in California, and the organisation, the global security team, pinpointed 12 different types of travellers, different profiles who travel to different regions to sit in on that training and to give feedback. The feedback was that the content was great, but it would definitely not work in their environment. So if we imagine a fast-paced, dynamic organisation full of millennials with very, very short attention spans, a classroom-style training of a full day's duration wasn't going to work. But they really wanted that high touch point where it was face-to-face in person. So what we did is we took the training course and we broke it down into 2-hour workshops, which are now delivered in blocks over a number of days, 4 times a year. And as a result, we've trained over 600 employees. And actually what we found is that some of their employees have also video conferenced in from different regions around the world. So they're absolutely getting a lot of bang for the buck, a lot of people trained. And also what we have seen a definite upside is that a number of travellers have averted physical assaults. So part of the classroom training that we do includes an element of conflict resolution, predator psychology, and some self-defense. And some of the techniques that we used or taught on that training course actually saved these 2 women from physical assaults. Our third case study is BP. BP are happy to be named as one of our happy clients. We've worked with BP for almost 4 years. And what they were looking for is the gender-specific support for their disparate groups of female travellers who were literally based all around the world. And the travellers really fall into 2 categories. So head office type individuals who travel to key business cities around the world. And then, of course, those travelling to the more challenging destinations where there may be rigs and drilling, etc. So BP opted for our corporate membership solution. This has been fully integrated into the travel intranet. So when travellers go on to book their travel, they can also access Maiden Voyage, and they've got access to our webinar series as well. And so what we found is here that we've got really good global engagement on the social platform. The members of BP's community are able to identify their own colleagues, or they can network in the wider pool of around about the 12,000 women who are using our platform. And they've also started to use the Traveller Wellbeing webinar series, as I mentioned. So the last one was on dealing with travel-related stress and anxiety, and the next one is dealing with jet lag. And then our final case study is actually for the travel industry. We also have a certification program for travel management companies. Grey Doors Group are the latest to join that certification program. So if you are looking for a TMC and you are also really keen to do something extra for your diverse traveller groups, I would be asking the TMCs what they do in this space to make sure that they're cognizant of the issues which impact your diverse groups. And so what Grey Doors Group were looking for was some extra additional guidance, some high touch points, some added value to safeguard their business travellers. And of course, they were looking for a competitive edge. And it's no secret, I don't think, that Grey Doors Group do operate also in some of the luxury goods and fashion markets. So the way that the TMC certification went about is that we audited Grey Doors Group, we spoke to a number of their clients, we also spoke to their travellers, we wrote a confidential report to give that specific feedback, and then all frontline staff were trained in female traveller safety. So when they're booking for a lone female traveller, they will be given some special consideration to the types of hotels, maybe the times of day that the flight is arriving, and various other considerations as well. And they will maybe even throw in a few snippets around the different countries that the travellers are travelling to. And of course, it gave them that USP against their competitors. So I'm going to move on now, and I'm going to share with you some of our top tips which we've extracted from our full-day training course and from our e-learning to help you to safeguard either yourself as a traveller or your diverse traveller groups. I'm going to start with the first section, which is really that preparation before you travel, that packing and pre-planning. And I'm going to start by sharing a heat map offered by Control Risk. As you can see, we've got the usual red, amber, green areas around the world. And in the olden days, green used to depict very, very safe, and the red used to depict could be rather dangerous. But as we've seen with latest events around the world, no one place is entirely safe and no one place is entirely dangerous. It could just be in the crazy world that we're living in right now, that you are in the wrong place at the wrong time and you may coincide with an incident. We're all busy people and we're always working flat out these days. And in the work environment, we're all familiar, I'm sure, with the saying, you know, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. And never a truer word said when it comes to preparing for your travel. So things that we would advise considering would be looking at the destination that you're traveling to. So things like the socioeconomic conditions. And of course, this impacts all travellers, but also we have to think about what attitudes are towards women in those countries and how we might be presenting ourselves and the way that we're dressing, for example. But also looking at the different types of crimes in the different regions. So, for example, we all know that there's a lot of petty theft and sometimes violent theft within Barcelona, but we've also seen a massive increase in some pretty horrendous sexual assaults in India. Also need to look at the stability of the government and looking at to see if there's any anniversaries or protests that may be taking place, so key dates not to travel, and of course any judiciary system trustworthiness issues. So if a lady was to report a sexual assault to the local justice organisations, would that mean that she would be potentially at risk of further assault? Or could it be that she would be imprisoned because she's being accused of having sex outside of marriage, for example? Then, of course, we'll be looking at any religious issues or conflicts. So quite often you see people wearing a cross and chain. It might not be appropriate to do that in some regions. And also the risks and different types of diseases, again, some which are pertinent to gender, and of course weather conditions, which is applicable to all travellers. So specifically thinking about dress code and appearance, of course, male and female need to adhere to local dress codes and culture, but I think it's no secret that if I was traveling to, say, Saudi Arabia with one of my male colleagues, he can probably pretty much go as he is, jump on the plane and be ready for business, whereas I would maybe have to change the way that I'm dressing, the way that I'm presenting myself in that country. Of course, we want travellers to try and fit in rather than stand out, and of course that doesn't mean turning up in national costume. So we like travellers to dress down rather than up, and of course be considerate of the different parts of the body that need to be covered up or not covered up in different societies. And again, thinking about leaving expensive jewellery and watches at home. But we might also recommend wearing a fake wedding ring, because we've had many incidents of women who are of a certain age who don't have children or a husband, and they're not wearing a ring, and that again attracts a lot of interest and attention in some of those regions. So other things to think about is if you're traveling to a more conservative society, maybe having travellers just travel with a pashmina, also great for when we're traveling to companies in sunny climes where we've got very vicious air conditioning. Maybe you need to keep a stock of abayas or hijabs for your travellers. And of course, if there was a terrorist incident, can your travellers actually run in the shoes that they're wearing? And of course, male and female, again, logos could provide some very interesting information. So some of our clients are really proud of the companies that they work for, and in fact, they're given free company clothing, but again, that could put them at a risk of kidnap. And even the types of luggage say something about potentially the gender or sexual orientation of a traveller. So a nice pink girly suitcase may give something away. It may be just luggage tags or luggage straps, etc. So again, and also think about the socioeconomic climates. The cheaper, older, less exciting luggage is less likely to be stolen. Now, thinking about some of the generic advice that's given to all travellers, sometimes that might miss out some of the things I'm going to share with you now. So, for example, Woman's Magazine seems quite innocuous, but picking up a copy of Cosmopolitan at Manchester Airport if I'm flying to a more conservative society could mean that I'm perceived to be travelling with pornographic literature if that magazine has got articles about sex or getting the best bikini body. Again, makeup, how I'm presenting myself. We've already talked about our body language and public displays of affection, but also I'm a rather smiley person myself, so making the eye contact or just being overly friendly again could attract unwanted attention. And also I'm a very tactile person, and having lived in Holland for 6 years where it's custom to kiss colleagues 3 times, at least now I know which way to kiss them to avoid ending up on the lips. But if I'm traveling to some parts of the world where that's absolutely not appropriate, again, I could accidentally do that if I'm with people who I'm familiar with. Again, different garments for different countries that I've talked about. And even where we may sit in the cab, in some countries, you know, we're encouraged to sit in the front and be chatty. And I've already talked about reporting a sexual assault or eating in a restaurant even. We've seen a couple of arrests where people of the opposite sex have been arrested because they've been eating in countries where it's illegal to be with somebody who's not your family member. Now, I've talked a lot about women travellers, but let's have a look at the LGBTQ community. I'm going to share another heat map with you, which is from the ILGA, so the International Lesbian and Gay Association. Eric will again send you a link to this report. And what you can see in the report is a list of all the countries around the world and the responses to homosexuality. So what we can see is that homosexuality is actually a criminal offence in 76 nations around the world, and it also carries the death penalty in the countries listed here. And actually, if we just have a look at the next slide, we can see some examples of 2 ladies who were caned in Malaysia, that was recently in the press, and 57 men here in Nigeria arrested as well. So if your travellers do identify with the LGBTQ community, of course, we're not saying that they can't travel to these 76 countries. what we're saying is get that information out to them in a way that's anonymous. So maybe having that on your corporate intranet, which can be assumed entirely anonymously, because you will have members of the LGBTQ community who are not yet out and don't want to out themselves by requesting this information. But other things to consider is that you may accidentally out a colleague in a country where it's dangerous. So we've seen examples of colleagues asking about the well-being of somebody else's same-sex partner in a country where homosexuality is illegal. Not only does it put their personal safety at risk, but it may actually invalidate the purpose of your business trip if that upsets local relations. But also, it's not just legal responses to homosexuality. Of course, there's also the risk of physical assault through homophobia, and we know that people will use dating apps such as Grindr with fake profiles to meet people and then go on to assault them. But also we know that hotel staff, for example, are monitoring behaviour in hotel bedrooms. And I spoke to a number of clients in the last few weeks who actually have their employees share a hotel bedroom when they're travelling on business. And again, if you've got two people of the same gender, if the beds have been pushed together or only one of the beds has been slept in, again, hotel staff may well report that onwards. So lots and lots of things to consider, and we can provide more information on that if needed. Now, the next section I would like to look at, specifically from a woman's perspective, is medical and pregnancy. So it may be that you are thinking of organising a conference, an incentive trip maybe for your sales team, but actually have you given some consideration to things like the Zika virus? So if you have a pregnant traveller or somebody who's planning to become pregnant, you could inadvertently be putting them at risk. And as we know, many women take some time to disclose the fact that they're pregnant. They may well be thinking what the career implications may be for them. They may be nervous, they may be waiting for that 3-month scan before they share that information. But also in those first 3 months of pregnancy, there is a higher risk to them. And of course, they may end up finding themselves travelling on business with morning sickness, multiplied by travel disruption makes for a very unhappy passenger. Other things to consider, of course, is with vaccinations, they may not be appropriate for pregnant travellers. But also airline policies will vary. I can give you an example of a traveller who was travelling to New Zealand on a business trip via the Middle East, and she got, as requested, a fit to fly certificate for an airline. It was valid for only 7 days, and so on her trip back, she presented this, or she was requested to present it to her airline, who said that it wasn't valid. So she literally found herself in a Middle Eastern country, ejected from the airport, forced to go and get another fit to fly certificate. She was stressed, tired, she had a long journey, pregnant, very, very uncomfortable situation for her. And of course, quite concerning for her husband, who was at home just wondering where his wife was in that country. So really something to consider for your pregnant travellers. Then, of course, we've got the insurance. So making sure that your business travel insurance not only covers your travellers and any pregnancy issues, but if the baby were to come early, does it also include that repatriation? And is it that the local hospital is still the most appropriate hospital for somebody who is pregnant? So next subject is hotel safety. It's one of my favourite subjects. As I mentioned, Maiden Voyage specialise in female-friendly hotels. Many examples of assaults which have happened in hotel rooms. So women waking up to find somebody looking at them, people breaking into the hotel room, sexual harassment, sexual assault, nuisance calls, etc. So there are things that you and your travellers can do, and there are also some hotel best practices that we expect that you would be holding your hotels accountable for. So of course, the first thing is making sure that the hotels that you're booking have got certain safety features, so maybe spy hole indoors, but more importantly, actually, we're looking for those double locking doors. And what I mean by a double locking door is actually 2 independent locks. Many hotels believe and tell us that they've got double locks because there's a bolt under the handle. but actually the upper lock is that secondary lock. And what that's going to do is to stop anybody from trying to get into the hotel room with a master key, or it's going to stop them from actually achieving that. But also, if the hotel have double allocated a room, which we know is really, really common, then again, that second person is not going to be able to get into the room. And we're not going to do a poll, but generally on our courses, around about a third of people have been interrupted in a hotel room or gone into one which is already occupied. Then the next thing to consider is that you may be sending travellers to a region whereby they don't have those two independent locks. And so we would recommend a device called the door jammer. We can provide a link to door jammer with a 20% discount code for anybody who joins our webinar. A door jammer, it looks quite big there, but it's the size of a mobile phone. I've travelled with it many times with just hand luggage and never been intercepted. And it just allows you to secure that door if you don't have a double locking door. And other things that we would advise travellers to do is to maybe book a room which doesn't have adjoining doors as well, so that, again, they only need to secure that one door. Now, one of the other biggest irritators that we come across is hotels that announce the room numbers out loud. At reception, we really train our travellers that politeness should come secondary to personal safety. It's not only is it embarrassing, it's also dangerous if a hotel were to do that and other people were to hear which room you were in. We've had a number of travellers who've had nuisance calls of a sexual nature and harassing nature to the hotel bedroom. But more seriously, a particular traveller who had left her bags with the concierge. There was a knock at the door. She heard the person at the other side say her name, and she assumed that it was a concierge, but it was actually someone who'd watched her check in and knocked on the door and gained access to the room and committed a serious sexual assault. Now, as I mentioned, Maiden Voyage is also looking at air transport safety, and so I'd just like to touch on a few onboard crimes that we are aware of. Firstly, we have got theft on board and sexual assault on board. This poor gentleman lost $260,000 worth of belongings on a flight. Again, not uncommon, as we're seeing in the survey that we're currently running, and 2 cases here of sexual assault on board. So in terms of how you and your travellers can reduce the risk, things to consider would be, of course, keeping valuables in sight at all time, making sure that hand luggage is also locked and secured, because if you're sleeping on a long haul flight, that's a potential that somebody could be accessing your luggage from the overhead bin. We also recommend booking an aisle seat. Also think it's healthier because you can get up and walk about during the course of the flight. And what we found is that airline responses to sexual harassment on board is very, very immature. So I would recommend that your travellers, if they are experiencing such crimes, should be extremely assertive with the crew to make sure that they're aware that this is an issue and they want to have it resolved. And also what we found and what aircrew back up in terms of our findings is that alcohol exacerbates that situation. So if somebody's drinking, it's likely to get worse. Now, thinking about arrival in the different cities, need to consider having your travellers arrive in the daylight hours, but also being cognizant of the route from the airport to their destination. And of course, having backup plans if the driver doesn't appear, and making sure that they've got the local address written in the local language. So we've had travellers dumped on the side of the road in both China and Russia. So again, if you've got that in the local language, then that's going to help them not get lost. And also, quite often what I'll do is I'll go to a hotel, pick up a business card so that I can present that card to the driver and they can see where I'm going to be staying. Erica, could you progress the slides forward for me, please? Thank you. Thinking about airport meet and greet, I would also be looking to agree some identification with my driver so that we can identify each other when we arrive in the different city. If we could just progress one more, please, Erica, that would be great, to airport meet and greet. So that is so that as we can see here, this gentleman here with Mr. Smith on the nameplate, that can easily be copied. And even though we know that lots of drivers now have this on an iPad, again, it's very easy to copy that. So make sure that you know that your driver or your travellers know that their driver is absolutely their driver before they get in that vehicle. And we're going to have just a look now at meetings and leisure time. Thinking about really what your travellers are doing when they are not in their meetings. So many of us have heard about the Me Too campaign, and of course many organisations, and I'm sure you have it too, have got sexual harassment at work policies. But what we know is that there is a slight increase in sexual harassment on business travel, not just from direct colleagues, it could be from suppliers or other business associates, particularly when you're in a cross-cultural situation. So I think it's really important if we just share some best practice with you in terms of having your colleagues let other people know who they're meeting. A really good thing that my PA does for me is if I'm meeting someone that I haven't met before, it's just getting a photograph of them from LinkedIn so that I can see what that person looks like, because it's also rather risky to say to someone, oh, by the way, are you Stephen? It's very easy for someone to say yes, and then you get caught into an uncomfortable situation. But also dictating the meeting venues. Quite often I'm going to a new city and meeting lots of different people, so it's good to just park ourselves in one specific location and have people come to us. And also being really mindful of drink spiking. Again, on a number of our courses, people have been victims of drink spiking. And of course, that just doesn't always just happen in a nightclub at 4 AM. It could happen at any time during the day. And in some of the more male-dominated industries, I found myself in this situation in a previous life. I was the only female person travelling with a group of colleagues, so also wondering about how I'm going to get myself back to the accommodation when my male colleagues just want to maybe stay out later. So making sure that I've got that already organised as well. And then finally, on the travel safety tips, I just want to share a few best practices on social media. Many of us will do the obligatory post on social media to say, you know, I'm in the Emirates lounge and I'm flying off to Dubai, glass of champagne in hand. But actually, again, rather a dangerous thing to do, because we know that 70% of burglars have used social media to stake out a property that they're going to burgle, because people have tweeted or checked in online to say that they are somewhere or they're going somewhere. But also what we know is that insurance policies will be invalidated if insurance companies can prove that you have shared that information online. Now, many of you won't be familiar with the concept of virtual kidnap. So that could be, for example, that Erica's about to board a flight board the new flight from London to Perth. So I think she's going to be in the air for about 22, 23 hours. So she checks in online, tells everybody she's about to board this long flight. That gives me plenty of time to stake out, stalk her family, and actually tell them that I've kidnapped Erica. They can't contact her during the course of that flight. So again, very, very stressful for all concerned. So they're just a snapshot really of some of our travel safety tips that we provide both in our online training and in our classroom training. And I hope you found some little nuggets or things that you can take away with you. So just to summarise what we've covered in today's webinar, we've just told you a little bit about who Maiden Voyage are. We've talked about the gender agenda, and I'm really pleased that 92% of you also agree with this. We've explored a little bit in terms of where TRM sits within your organisation. We've looked at some case studies of organisations that have a diverse travel policy, and we shared some top tips on safeguarding your female and LGBT travellers. So what's next? As a thank you for your time today, we're going to be offering free 15-minute follow-up consultations whereby you can ask us literally anything at all about female business traveller safety or LGBT traveller safety. So Erica will send you a follow-up email in terms of how to access this. She will also send you all the resources that I talked about today. We've got 11 minutes left, which is great, so we can take some questions. And I'm just going to leave you with a final slide, which has got our contact details on there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Carolyn. So We've got a few questions, so I'm sure that there's lots of food for thought that has come across there, and I appreciate it's going to probably trigger quite a lot of internal conversation, which is great. But I'm going to ask you a question, Carolyn. How can I help my LGBT travellers without encouraging them to hide their sexuality and identity?
That's a really good point, because you don't want to not make that information available to somebody who doesn't want to out themselves. And so what I would do is have all the information, maybe links to the LGA report, maybe links to something like Rainbow Hotels that we've just come across, which are gay friendly, on your corporate intranet, and just make it widely known and widely available to individuals so that they can go and consume that, hopefully without any tracking to see what people have accessed on that intranet.
Okay, thank you. We've got another one here. It says, what are the first steps a business should take to safeguard diverse travellers?
What I would probably do is look at the travel process right now, and hand on heart think about whether or not they would be comfortable sending maybe the daughter or somebody close to them to that region at that time of day using those particular transport providers, hotels, etc. So just have a moralistic view on that, but also speak to your travellers. As I mentioned, they don't have that feedback loop in many organisations. And in fact, one of the NGOs have just run a survey to ask their travellers what issues they face when travelling on business. It's non-gender specific, but of course, people can choose whether they're male or female during the survey, and they can get some real insights. But also, as I mentioned earlier, it may be that you want to take off certain hotels, certain chauffeur drive companies, certain protection companies, because they may have crossed the line, but your travellers have thought it was such a small incident that they didn't feel to report it.
Okay, thank you. Someone just put here, what is the safest country that you've travelled to, Carolyn? That's a personal question.
Oh my word. Well, I am actually a bit of a calamity Jane. So if anybody wants an exciting trip, then always travel with me, because we're always going to get into trouble. I can't say that any country is more safe than any other. I can say that my last business trip, I failed to prepare, and so therefore I failed. I flew to Tahiti in French Polynesia. And I had all my travel insurance programmed into my mobile phone, all the details. But when I got there, I'd been too lazy, if I'm really honest, to inform my cell phone provider that I was traveling to that region, and wasn't aware that there was no compatible network with EE or T-Mobile. I then went onto a yacht, swimming with sharks, luckily incident-free on this trip. But had anything happened to me, I wouldn't have been able to access my medical insurance because I didn't actually have a mobile signal.
So you'll definitely be doing that next time, then? I
definitely will. If I can afford to go back to Tahiti to swim with sharks, yes.
Okay. Someone else put here, Fiona's put, what are your thoughts on Airbnb usage in business travel?
Oh, interesting. So a number of clients who we work with have integrated Airbnb into their travel programs. So the first thing to be mindful of is, even if it's not integrated in your travel program, even if you don't endorse it, if you actually sign off somebody's expenses who have used an Airbnb, then you are setting a precedence. And therefore, if anybody else were to use an Airbnb and something were to happen, then you would be liable. We have done some work with Airbnb, and what I can tell you is that they have a business ready platform which allows you to, as an employer, to track those bookings. But also the business ready properties are generally super hosted. There are individual properties, they've got good quality Wi-Fi and hairdryers. So if anybody is thinking of doing that for the first time, then happy to have a 15-minute consultation with you, and we can probably introduce you to other clients who've successfully implemented sharing economy into their travel programs.
Fantastic. And what about Uber?
So again, we spent some time looking under the bonnet at Uber. They also have a business ready platform, and you can also, I understand, go for higher level of coverage as well in terms of insurance. Now, of course, Uber isn't legal in every country, and I've just done some work in Dublin actually, and I was told that Uber isn't actually recognised in Dublin. So again, things to consider is whether or not the checks and the insurance are the same as Uber in your home country. So I wouldn't necessarily be endorsing using Uber in India. In fact, we've just seen a horrific attack on the lady over there. Nigeria, for example. But personally, when I'm in Silicon Valley, it's the most convenient way for me to get around, and I will also use it here in Leeds too.
So do your research basically on what it is that you're using.
Yes, and if you're a travel manager or a travel risk manager, and your travellers are going to be using Uber, and you are endorsing or you're signing off receipts, then I would say it's better to go for a proper, fully integrated business solution rather than the ad hoc personal usage solution.
Okay, we've got another question here. So we've got attentive audience here today, which is great to get these questions in now. So I definitely think we should do more. How do we go about starting the conversation, particularly because we get some people say that we need to treat men and women the same?
Absolutely. So I'm more than happy, again, in a one-to-one to talk through the elephant slide that I shared with you earlier, because as an organisation, you do have a legal responsibility and duty of care obligation. So if you were sending a woman to a culturally different region, or a member of the LGBTQ community to a culturally different region, and something happened whereby you hadn't provided the specific information, then you would be liable as an employer. And of course, legal responsibilities and liabilities is one thing, but also I think there's a moral obligation as well. So I'm more than happy to help you have those conversations internally. Where we found it's worked really, really well is one of our clients is a large US entertainment giant. And before we started to work with them, is we got all the different people in a room. So HR, security, travel managers, PAs who were also booking travel, and did a very, very similar session to what we've done today so that they could ask all those tricky questions.
Okay, and this is the last one. So if anybody else has got any more questions, please send them through. So this person says, how best can my business inform staff on how to fit in an unfamiliar country and culture? So I guess that's around the educational piece.
Absolutely. So actually what I always say is the best source of advice is your own colleagues who've been to a region, because they fit your profile, they look like you, they behave like you, they travel in the same way, they do the same things when they get there. So if you've got colleagues who've already been to that particular destination, then I would tap into them. We also have 80 ambassadors around the world. So these are quite often expat ladies who've had to come to terms with, work with, learn about the local culture and dress code. So they're not women who live in those countries who are, I guess, blind to what might be peculiar for an external person. I can also recommend a great book which is called Kiss, Bow or Shake Hands, which tells you about the cultural differences and things like gifting. So again, the wrong gift in the wrong country could be very, very offensive. And again, more than happy to do a 15-minute session to talk about that if you want more detail.
Super. Gosh, there's so much to think about, really, isn't there? I always say, you don't know what you don't know, do you? So unless you mitigate, unless you educate, how can you possibly mitigate for those risks? So it's such a big piece around education. So we've had all of our questions. We've managed to get through them. Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you to all of you that have dialed in. Thank you for the investment of your time. We definitely hope that you found it informative and beneficial. Go away, have those internal conversations. We're here to help. As Carolyn mentioned, I will be sending out a follow-up email, so look out for that. And very happy to help you and continue those conversations. So without further ado, Carolyn, thank you. Thank you again to everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Be safe. Thanks, Carolyn.
Nobody else can hear us now, can they?